You sit before me, and although you may believe you came here out of curiosity or a quiet longing for clarity, I sense something far older moving beneath your surface. There is a tremor in your psyche, a subtle yet unmistakable stirring that tells me your life is approaching a threshold. You may not recognize it yet, but the unconscious has already begun arranging the symbols, dreams, and synchronicities that announce a return not to the past, but to the forgotten center of yourself. And I tell you this without hesitation, the empath is about to enter the biggest comeback of their life. Not because fate suddenly grows generous, but because the soul has grown tired of watching you stand outside your own power. You see, the psyche speaks long before the intellect catches up. It whispers through restlessness, through the ache of boundaries crossed one too many times, through the persistent fatigue of giving without being received. When the empath reaches that moment when exhaustion feels ancient, not physical but archetypal, it is the surest sign that the unconscious is preparing a reversal. Every collapse contains the seed of a return, but only those with the sensitivity to hear the soul's language recognize the meaning behind their own breaking. You have been fragile only because the time of your strength has not yet arrived. You have been silent only because the words you are destined to speak had not yet matured in the dark soil of your inner night. Empaths, by their nature, have been trained by life to feel the world more deeply than others. This depth is not sentimental, it is instinctual, primordial, and often unbearably heavy. You carry the emotional residues of rooms, of childhoods, of ancestral wounds that were never yours but somehow became your burden. You absorb the unsaid words, the hidden tensions, the secret suffering of others, and you attempt, without even knowing it, to transmute it into harmony. But no one can serve as an alchemical vessel forever. There comes a moment when the psyche intervenes and says enough. That moment, for many of you, has been mistaken for despair. In truth, it is preparation, for the unconscious does not care for your comfort. It cares for your becoming. When the empath is pushed to the edges of their endurance, when they feel unseen, undervalued, manipulated, or drained, it is not a punishment, but a call. The psyche is attempting to break the shell of the old self, the compliant self, the wounded helper who learned to survive by anticipating the emotions of others. You were not born to be an emotional caretaker for the world. You were born to be a bridge between the visible and the invisible, between the personal self and the collective psyche, and the world cannot receive what you carry until you reclaim what you lost. I have witnessed many empaths misunderstand the nature of their suffering. They believe themselves weak because they are overwhelmed, passive because they avoid conflict, naive because they trust too easily. But I tell you, these qualities are distortions of a deeper strength that has not yet learned to express itself consciously. Overwhelm is the consequence of untrained perception. Avoidance is the defense mechanism of a psyche that has not yet owned its shadow. And excessive trust is the longing of the inner child who still hopes that goodness alone will ensure safety. But each of these wounds, when brought into awareness, becomes the very material from which your greatest power emerges. There is a reason the empath's comeback is so profound. Every other personality type rises by acquiring new qualities, while the empath rises by reclaiming what was always theirs: your strength, your intuition, your clarity to your inner authority. They were never absent, only hidden beneath layers of conditioning. You were taught to fear your own insight because others feared being seen by it. You were taught to shrink your emotional intelligence because it reflected truths others were unwilling to face. You learned to dim your light, not out of humility, but out of survival. And yet, the unconscious never forgets its original design. When an empath begins their return, the first sign is not confidence, it is disillusionment. You start seeing people as they are, not as your hope painted them to be. You sense manipulation, not because you are suspicious, but because your psyche refuses to let you betray yourself again. You withdraw from certain relationships without knowing why, as if guided by an invisible hand, and you begin to feel something unfamiliar rising in you, a quiet fire, a refusal to tolerate what once felt inevitable. This fire is not anger, though it may feel like it. It is the archetype of the warrior awakening from its long slumber in the shadow. The empath's shadow is not darkness. It is power. It is the energy you disowned in order to maintain harmony. It is the anger you suppressed to avoid abandonment. It is the truth you swallowed to keep the peace. But there comes a moment in every empath's life when the shadow refuses to stay buried. You may feel it as a strange intensity, a sharper intuition, a sudden clarity about who drains you and who nourishes you. You may even feel guilty for this clarity because you were raised to believe that boundaries are unkind. But the soul does not care for the social etiquette of the wounded world. It cares for your wholeness. And so the comeback begins with a rupture, a dream, a conflict, an epiphany, a loss. Something breaks the old pattern and exposes the truth you tried not to see. You wake up one day and realize you can no longer carry the emotional weight of others. You can no longer be the silent healer who absorbs pain without speaking their own needs. You can no longer remain in spaces where your intuition whispers warnings. Your conscious mind tries to dismiss. The psyche grows louder when ignored, and for the empath, its voice often becomes thunder. You may believe that your sensitivity has isolated you, but I tell you, your sensitivity is the very instrument that will lead you back to yourself. It was not given to you as a burden, it was given to you as a compass. Every overwhelming moment, every heartbreak, every betrayal you endured was not a sign of your fragility. It was the training ground for your return. The unconscious prepares the empath with a curriculum so rigorous that only a soul with your depth could survive it. And though you may have felt broken at times, you were never broken. You were being dismantled so you could be rebuilt without the distortions that once controlled you. The comeback of the empath is unlike any other transformation because it does not rely on external achievement. It unfolds inwardly, silently, in the sacred chambers of the psyche. It begins when you stop fighting yourself, when you stop trying to be who others expect you to be, when you turn inward and ask, what is the truth beneath my tiredness? What is the meaning behind my sensitivity? What is the destiny hidden inside my wounds? The answer emerges not through logic, but through symbols. You may dream of water rising and swallowing old houses. This is the unconscious, reclaiming the territory of outdated identities. You may dream of broken mirrors. This is the shattering of false self-images. You may dream of a forest in twilight. This is the invitation to step into the unknown, where your true nature waits. The psyche never speaks randomly. Every dream, every intuition, every bodily sensation is part of a larger conversation between the conscious self and the great depths beneath it. And as this conversation deepens, something extraordinary happens. The empath begins to feel their own presence again. It is subtle at first, like a faint hum in the chest or a warmth behind the sternum. Then it grows, becoming a sense of inner solidity, a grounding that was previously absent. You feel less porous, less easily swayed by the emotions of others. You begin to sense where you end and others begin, and slowly, the center that once dissolved into the needs of the world becomes unmistakably your own. This is the beginning of your return. Not a return to who you used to be, but a return to who you were before life taught you to abandon yourself. And I assure you, once the empath returns to their own center, there is no force on earth that can pull them back into the roles that once imprisoned them. As this inner solidity grows within you, something begins to shift in your relationship with the world. The empath who once felt like a vessel for the emotions of others starts to feel like a vessel for something far greater, the movement of the self. And when the self rises, when the deep organizing principle of the psyche awakens and begins reclaiming its dominion, the outer life can no longer remain as it was. You may notice that relationships built on dependency start to feel strangely hollow. Situations where you once tolerated disrespect now feel intolerable. Obligations you carried out of guilt no longer bind you. This is not rebellion, it is alignment. When the unconscious begins orchestrating a comeback, it often begins by dismantling the version of you that made your wounds comfortable for others. And make no mistake, your wounds have served many people. Your silence made them feel powerful. Your empathy made them feel forgiven. Your softness made them feel less responsible for their own shadows. And so, when you rise, some will resist, but this resistance is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is a sign you are no longer playing the role that once kept their own unconscious at bay. I want you to understand a profound truth. The empath's comeback is not loud. It is not a triumph celebrated by the world. It is not a victory built on applause. It is the quiet revolution of a soul returning to its rightful center. It happens internally, long before the outer world responds. The first movement is always inward, always subtle, always symbolic. The psyche withdraws your energy from the external and reclaims it for your own transformation. You may feel tired, withdrawn, introspective, even lonely, but do not mistake this for regression. It is incubation. Just as the chrysalis appears inert from the outside, the empath in this stage is undergoing a metamorphosis. No one else can see. The nervous system rewires itself. The emotional body purges attachments that no longer resonate with your truth. The unconscious reorganizes its symbols, forming a new internal map that aligns with who you are becoming. This is why old cycles suddenly lose their appeal. This is why familiar patterns feel suffocating. This is why your soul refuses to participate in dynamics that once seemed inevitable. You are being prepared for your return. And yet, as you stand in this threshold between the old self and the emerging self, you may feel disoriented. Empaths are familiar with sensing the emotional landscapes of others. But this stage requires sensing your own. You are being asked to feel your emotions, not as signals for caretaking, but as messages from your deeper nature. This is unfamiliar for many empaths because the world has conditioned you to distrust the intensity of your inner life. You were taught to be calm, accommodating, understanding. Yet beneath this false serenity was a vast ocean of unexpressed truth. When the empath begins to encounter this ocean, they often fear drowning. But drowning is only possible when you resist what the psyche is trying to reveal. If you surrender, instead, if you allow the waves to speak, you will discover that they are not chaotic at all. They are rhythmic, ancient, and wise. They carry the forgotten instincts of your lineage, the untold stories of your childhood, the warning signals you ignored, the dreams you postponed, and more importantly, they carry the blueprint of your comeback. This comeback is not linear. It does not unfold in predictable steps. It arrives in spirals, pulling you deeper into yourself, only to lift you higher in the next turn. One moment you may feel enlightened, clear, certain of your path. The next, you may feel confused, doubtful, fragile. This fluctuation is not failure. It is transformation. The psyche moves in waves, not straight lines, and the empaths, having lived most of their life attuned to waves outside themselves, must now learn to ride the waves within. There will be a moment, perhaps it has already begun, when you start sensing a boundary rising from the depths of your being. This boundary does not emerge from anger, though it may be accompanied by anger. It emerges from a newfound fidelity to your own essence. You no longer have the ability to betray yourself in order to maintain peace. You no longer have the capacity to shrink in the presence of others' expectations. You find yourself speaking truths you previously swallowed. You find yourself walking away from situations that once trapped you, and you do this not out of spite, but out of inevitability. The psyche refuses to let you return to fragmentation. As your inner authority awakens, the world around you begins to reveal its masks. You notice patterns in people that you once overlooked. You see the manipulator behind the charming smile, the emptiness behind the grandiose persona, the hunger behind the victim narrative. This clarity is not cynicism. It is sight, and when the empath sees clearly, when their intuition is no longer clouded by hope or obligation, they become impossible to deceive. This is the phase where many empaths fear they are becoming cold, detached, or harsh, but in truth, you are becoming differentiated. You are learning to stand in your own psychic territory without merging into the emotional bodies of others. You are learning the sacred art of autonomy. For too long, you have mistaken enmeshment for empathy, compliance for compassion, silence for wisdom. But now, the unconscious is presenting you with a new mode of being, one where you are not an absorber of emotion, but a transmitter of authenticity. As you embody this authenticity, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your intuition sharpens with an almost supernatural precision. It is not the vague intuition of guessing someone's mood. It is the deep, penetrating intuition of seeing their psyche. You sense motivations, wounds, projections, and hidden fears with clarity that startles even you. This gift was always present, but it was buried beneath exhaustion. When the empath stops leaking energy into draining dynamics, the intuitive faculty becomes luminous, and with this luminosity comes another revelation. You begin to understand your own story in a way you never have before. Memories rise to the surface, not to haunt you, but to liberate you. You see your childhood not through the lens of nostalgia or pain, but through the lens of archetype. You recognize the roles you were assigned, the emotional labor you performed, the unconscious contracts you signed long before you had the language to name them. These realizations may feel heavy, but they are not meant to burden you. They are meant to free you. For the comeback of the empath is not about becoming someone new. It is about ending the unconscious contracts that forced you to abandon who you are. When the child in you learned to read the emotional weather of the household, you became hyper-attuned. When you learned that your safety depended on pleasing others, you became accommodating. When you learned that your worth came from healing the wounds of those around you, you became indispensable. But every one of these adaptations was a gift misdirected, not a flaw. And now the psyche calls you to redirect those gifts toward your own becoming. There is an inner child within every empath who has been waiting decades for you to return. This child does not need protection from the world. They need protection from the parts of you that learned to betray yourself. They need you to unlearn the reflex of self-abandonment. They need you to recognize that you were never too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. You were simply born with the capacity to perceive what others deny. And now, as the comeback gathers momentum, this inner child becomes your ally. There comes a moment in the empath's journey when the old self dissolves with a mixture of grief and relief. You may find yourself mourning relationships that were never truly reciprocal. You may grieve the years you spent giving to those who could not receive you. You may grieve the person you had to become in order to survive environments that were incapable of honoring your depth. But this grief is sacred. It is not the grief of loss, it is the grief of rebirth. As the old self is shed, the new self does not burst forth violently. It emerges gently, like dawn, breaking over a quiet valley. You feel a lightness in your chest that has no obvious cause. You wake with a sense of anticipation, as if something is calling you from the horizon of your own future. You begin to feel moments of joy that arise not from external validation, but from the simple act of being in alignment with yourself. This is the self drawing nearer, and when the self draws near, life cannot remain small. The world becomes symbolic again. You notice synchronicities that feel like secret messages. Numbers repeat. Dreams intensify. Strangers say things that resonate with uncanny accuracy. The unconscious is no longer content to whisper, it begins to speak in signs, and you, the empath, hear it clearly because your sensitivity is not a wound, but an antenna. This is the stage where your comeback accelerates. The energy that once leaked outward begins to circulate within you. You feel less drained and more empowered. You feel less anxious and more anchored. You feel less reactive and more observant. The empath who once absorbed the storms of others now becomes the calm center through which storms dissolve. And yet, the greatest transformation still lies ahead. As the empath continues along this inner journey, the psyche begins to unlock something that has been dormant for far too long. The instinct for self-governance. This instinct is far older than your wounds. It is older than your childhood, older than the roles you learned to play, older even than the emotional reflexes that have shaped your relationships. It is an instinct belonging to the self, the central organizing principle of the psyche, and it emerges when the unconscious decides that the time of fragmentation has passed. You may feel it as a quiet certainty rising in your chest, as if your inner life is no longer willing to tolerate being shaped by the expectations of others. This is not rebellion. It is the long-awaited recalibration of your reality. For much of your life, you have allowed the emotions of others to enter you as if you were a house without walls. You learned to navigate the world by attuning to its shifts and storms, believing that if you could understand the emotional states around you, you could protect yourself from harm. And for a time, this was necessary. The child who grows up sensing instability must learn the weather patterns of the household in order to survive. But now, as your consciousness expands, you begin to see that what once safeguarded you has become the very thing that limits you. You are not meant to absorb life, you are meant to engage with it. The empath's comeback requires a reorientation of energy. Instead of flowing outward by reflex, your energy begins to circulate within, creating a subtle force field around your psyche. You may notice that people who once drained you now seem unable to penetrate your emotional space. Their moods no longer feel like storms you must shelter from. Their projections no longer feel like truths you must internalize. And the reason for this is simple. The unconscious has withdrawn your compliance from dynamics that once fed on your empathy. You are no longer offering yourself as the emotional sponge for anyone who demands your softness. With this shift, something extraordinary begins to happen. The world starts revealing its true shape to you. Not the shape you once perceived through the lens of your wounds. You start seeing human behavior with unparalleled clarity. You recognize the insecurity beneath arrogance, the loneliness beneath manipulation, the unhealed trauma behind cruelty. You notice the subtle movements of shadow in conversations, the unconscious motivations in relationships, the quiet signals of truth behind every lie. This sight is not judgment, it is understanding, and understanding is the empath's greatest form of power. Many empaths fear their own clarity because it disrupts the illusions that once made them feel safe. If you can see through someone's intentions, you can no longer pretend ignorance. If you can sense the misalignment of a relationship, you can no longer justify staying. If you can feel the falseness of a dynamic, you can no longer participate in it peacefully. But this fear is the remnant of an outdated self. The version of you that feared clarity was the version whose survival depended on maintaining harmony. Now, the version of you that is rising depends on maintaining integrity. You may find yourself speaking truths that surprise even you. These truths do not come from anger, they come from alignment. They rise in your throat with a kind of inevitability, as if the unconscious has taken hold of your voice and refuses to let you betray yourself again. You may say no where you once said yes. You may set boundaries where you once allowed endless access. You may walk away from dynamics that once defined your identity. This is not coldness, it is self-possession. And as you become more self-possessed, the individuals who once relied on your emotional compliance may react with confusion or even hostility. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of being selfish. But this is the inevitable reaction of anyone who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Do not let their confusion become your guilt. Your comeback requires the courage to disappoint the versions of others who only loved the version of you that overgave. In this stage of transformation, the empath encounters one of the most profound mysteries of the psyche, the return of the shadow. The shadow is not the dark part of you, it is the unlived part of you. It contains everything you suppressed in order to survive: your anger, your instincts, your desire for truth, your inner authority, your right to take up space, your ability to say no, your capacity for discernment. These were not lost. They were held in the unconscious, waiting for the day you would be strong enough to integrate them. When the shadow rises, it does not rise to destroy you, it rises to complete you. The empath who integrates their shadow becomes unrecognizable to those who only knew their softness. You are no longer appeasing, you are no longer porous, you are no longer willing to sacrifice your well-being in the name of compassion. Instead, you become someone who embodies authenticity with a kind of fearless grace. The shadow does not make you harsh, it makes you whole. And with wholeness comes a new form of power. This power is not dominance, it is not control, it is not superiority. It is presence. When the empath embodies their self, others feel it before you speak a word. There is a stillness around you that commands respect, a clarity in your gaze that pierces through falsehood, a calmness in your demeanor that unsettles those who rely on chaos. This presence is not something you cultivate. It emerges naturally when you stop abandoning yourself. In this presence, you begin to understand one of the deepest truths of Jungian psychology. Your greatest wounds were never personal, they were archetypal. The empath does not merely carry personal pain, they carry the unresolved energies of generations. The sadness you felt without cause may not have been yours. The fear you could not explain may not have begun with you. The loneliness that haunted your childhood may have belonged to someone who lived long before you were born. Empaths often inherit what others refuse to feel. But here is the miracle, what you inherited. You are now releasing. When the empath heals, the lineage heals, the comeback you are experiencing is not an individual victory. It is a collective rebalancing. Your transformation does not end with you. It radiates backward into the past, altering the psychic inheritance of your ancestors, and forward into the future, freeing the generations yet to come. Your healing is the unconscious correcting a pattern that has persisted for decades, perhaps centuries. This is why the empath's comeback feels monumental. It is not simply a personal shift, it is a structural shift in the architecture of your psyche. You are not just changing behaviors, you are rewriting your internal mythology. You are dissolving the archetype of the wounded healer within you and giving birth to the archetype of the sovereign soul. You are no longer the one who absorbs the pain of others. You are the one who transforms the psychic environment by embodying truth. There is a point in this journey, perhaps you are approaching it now, when the empath begins to feel something they have not felt in a very long time, inner safety. This safety does not come from people, it does not come from circumstances, it does not come from external validation. It comes from the quiet knowledge that you will no longer abandon yourself. When this realization dawns, the nervous system relaxes in ways it never has before. You feel grounded, rooted, centered. You feel, perhaps for the first time, that you are on your own side. From this safety emerges the next phase of your comeback, the return of your voice. The empath's voice has always been the most silenced part of them. Silenced by fear of conflict, silenced by fear of rejection, silenced by the belief that your needs were too much or your truths too heavy. But now, the unconscious is urging you to speak, not loudly, not aggressively, but truthfully. When the empath begins to speak from authenticity, their voice carries an unusual resonance. It is calm, yet unyielding, soft, yet powerful, gentle, yet impossible to dismiss. This voice becomes one of your greatest tools for navigating the world. As the self begins to take root, you will notice that people listen differently, they respond differently. Some will lean closer, drawn to the clarity you emanate. Others will pull away, threatened by your growth. Both reactions are signs of your emergence. You are no longer the person you once were, and the world is adjusting to that fact. As you continue to rise, the psyche begins preparing you for the final movement of your return. And this movement does not involve fighting, proving, or convincing anyone of your worth. It involves embodiment. The empath who returns to themselves does not announce their transformation. They live it. Their boundaries become natural. Their intuition becomes unquestioned. Their presence becomes undeniable. Their energy becomes sovereign. And it is in this embodiment, this silent yet powerful alignment, that the empath steps into the greatest comeback of their life. As you enter this final movement of your transformation, you will notice that the world around you begins to shift in ways both subtle and profound. The empath who once walked through life as if navigating a labyrinth of emotional hazards now steps with a kind of grounded confidence, as though the maze itself has rearranged into a straight path. This is not because the world has changed, but because your perception has evolved. The unconscious has reclaimed its authority, and with it, the distortions that once clouded your vision have dissolved. You begin to see with what the mystics call the inner eye, an awareness that perceives both the visible and the invisible, the spoken and the unspoken, the conscious and the deeply unconscious currents of reality. This clarity brings with it a sense of calm you may not have known before. It is not the calm of disregard, nor the calm of avoidance. It is the calm of alignment. You are no longer torn between your outer obligations and your inner knowing. You no longer split yourself between who the world wants you to be and who your soul insists you are. There is a unity emerging within you, a coherence of being that radiates outward and alters the very atmosphere of your presence. People will feel this. Some will be drawn to it instinctively, as though sensing a rare frequency that resonates with their unspoken longing for wholeness. Others will retreat, not because you have become unkind, but because your clarity illuminates the shadows they would rather keep hidden. You must understand this. Your comeback is not merely a personal triumph. It is a seismic shift in the psychic ecosystem around you. Whenever an individual becomes whole, the collective unconscious reshuffles, adjusting to accommodate the presence of a more awakened soul. It is in this stage that many empaths experience a strange paradox. The more powerful you become internally, the less you feel the need to display that power externally. You no longer need to explain yourself, justify your boundaries, or persuade others to see your worth. You no longer feel compelled to fix or guide or rescue. You understand at a visceral level that every individual must walk their own path through the labyrinth of their psyche. The empath's greatest comeback is not becoming a savior. It is becoming sovereign. This sovereignty expresses itself in the most subtle ways. You notice that you speak less but say more. You act less impulsively and more intentionally. You give without depleting yourself. You love without losing yourself. You walk away without collapsing. You feel sadness without drowning. You experience joy without attachment. You see truth without fear. This is the self-calm, expansive, deeply rooted, moving through your life with steady purpose. And when the self moves, life responds. Opportunities begin to align, not because you chase them, but because your inner alignment magnetizes them. Relationships recalibrate. The ones built on unconscious contracts fall away. The ones grounded in authenticity deepen. New connections emerge with a sense of synchronicity, as though guided by an unseen intelligence that orchestrates bonds based on resonance rather than proximity. Even your environment shifts. You may feel drawn to new places, new creative pursuits, new ways of expressing your inner life. This impulse is the psyche guiding you toward the landscapes where your next chapter will unfold. Many empaths, upon reaching this stage, feel the presence of something they had long forgotten, a quiet inner companion that walks with them, offering guidance, not in words but in intuitive certainties. This companion is not an external presence. It is the self, now fully awakened, now fully integrated, now fully in dialogue with your conscious mind. You begin to make choices not out of fear or guilt or obligation, but out of alignment with this inner companion. And these choices, though mysterious, always lead you toward greater coherence. With this coherence comes another revelation, that your deepest wounds were preparing you for this emergence. The heartbreaks that once shattered you now appear as initiations. The betrayals that left you questioning your worth now appear as lessons in discernment. The loneliness that haunted your early years now reveals itself as the training ground for your intuitive depth. The empath who rises does not rise in spite of their wounds. They rise because of them. The wound is the portal through which the self returns. As you integrate this realization, the final layers of your old self begin to dissolve. You find yourself letting go of identities that once defined you: the caretaker, the healer, the peacemaker, the strong one, the one who understands. These roles were never your essence. They were survival strategies shaped by environments that did not yet recognize your nature. Now, as you stand at the threshold of your own becoming, these identities fall away like old garments that no longer fit the shape of who you are becoming. In their absence, a new identity emerges, not one imposed by the world, but one rising from the depths of your psyche. The empath who returns does not become hardened. They become clear. They do not become distant. They become discerning. They do not become less emotional. They become emotionally sovereign. This sovereignty does not isolate you. It frees you. For the first time, you love without fear. You give without depletion. You sense without merging. You see without absorbing. You stand in the world not as a responder, but as an originator. And it is here at the summit of your comeback that you realize something profound. Your sensitivity was never the problem. It was the unclaimed power beneath that sensitivity that frightened you. Now that this power has been integrated, The sensitivity becomes a gift of staggering magnitude. You perceive the world with an accuracy that surpasses logic. You feel the truth of situations before they unfold. You understand the emotional landscape of others with clarity that can guide, protect, and empower, but you no longer feel compelled to intervene. You trust that each soul must navigate its own journey. With this trust comes peace, a peace that is not dependent on circumstances, but emerges from your alignment with your own essence. You no longer seek to control life, you participate in it. You no longer fear the unknown, you walk toward it. You no longer view your inner world as something to manage. You treat it as sacred territory. This reverence for your inner life changes everything. The empath's comeback is not a return to who you were. It is the emergence of who you were always meant to become. And as you step fully into this emergence, the unconscious unveils one final truth. The truth that all along, your journey was never about saving others. It was about remembering yourself. The empath's greatest gift is not their ability to feel the world. It is their ability to feel the soul. But in order to feel the soul of another, you had to first rediscover your own. And now that you have, life will not be able to unfold as it once did. You will no longer accept smallness. You will no longer tolerate dishonesty. You will no longer entertain anything that asks you to abandon your inner truth. This is the empath's return, a return not to the past, but to the self, a return not to the old identity, but to wholeness, a return not to compliance, but to sovereignty. You stand now at a threshold few ever reach, and as you cross it, you do so with the full awareness that your sensitivity is not your weakness, it is your compass. Your intuition is not your burden, it is your guide. Your boundaries are not your walls, they are your gateways to a life lived in truth. And so I tell you, with the quiet certainty of one who has witnessed countless transformations, the empath is about to enter the biggest comeback of their life, because the unconscious has decided that your time of fragmentation is over. The self has returned, the shadow has been integrated, the child has been reclaimed, the soul has awakened, and nothing, not fear, not memory, not expectation, not the echoes of your past, can stop the movement of a psyche that has chosen wholeness. Walk forward now, not as the empath who once absorbed the world, but as the empath who now shapes it through presence, clarity, and truth. Your comeback is not a moment, it is a destiny, and it has already begun